Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. This weekend, we hosted the inaugural Defence Summit of Firstpost. From India's Defence Minister to Army Chief and DRDO Chief to former Prime Ministers and Defence Ministers of India's strategic partner countries, local defence manufacturers and international players, we got stakeholders from all sides to talk about self-reliance, securing the seas, artificial intelligence, diversification and the future of conflicts. For those of you who joined these conversations, thank you. For those who couldn't, you can find them on our website. We've taken notes on the insights shared by all our speakers and we'll use them as we put together stories for you. Tonight, we begin with the Maldives. Their former defense minister was with us. We'll tell you what she said and why President Muizzu finds himself in a spot over his India Out campaign. The opposition has now accused him of lying. In India, new data shows where people are spending their money and how much. In the US, Donald Trump has beaten Nikki Haley in her home state, but he faces a bigger challenge ahead. We'll discuss that. In Ukraine, talk of a peace offering to Russia as the war enters the third year. In Pakistan, a woman harassed by a mob over her dress. In Europe, Sweden is all set to join the NATO, but what does it change? In Brazil, thousands of people march in support of former President Jair Bolsonaro. In Algeria, the biggest mosque in Africa, inaugurated amid a lot of controversy. In Bangladesh, the government has banned the adoption of elephants. We'll tell you why. And how did Finland go from being the country with very high suicide rates to being the world's happiest nation? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Israel strikes East Lebanon for the first time since the Gaza war began, targets Hezbollah sites near the city of Baalbek. The city is close to the border with Syria, a key Hezbollah ally. Since October, Israel and Hezbollah have traded cross-border fire frequently, but so far it was restricted to southern Lebanon. Denmark closes its Nord Stream sabotage probe. Earlier this month, neighboring Sweden had closed its investigation. Only Germany now has an ongoing probe into the leaks. In September 2022, 4 large leaks were discovered on Nord Stream's 2 pipelines. In Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif's daughter takes charge of Punjab, its most populous region. Maryam Sharif is elected Punjab's chief minister. She becomes the first woman in the country to govern a province. Pakistan's Punjab province has 127 million people, which is more than half of the national population. Cristiano Ronaldo in the line of fire, facing backlash for allegedly making an obscene gesture. This incident took place after his team Al Nassr's win in the Saudi Pro League yesterday. Chants of Messi reportedly angered Ronaldo, which led to the gesture. And over 2 million animals have died in Mongolia this winter. The landlocked country has had an extreme winter. Most of the livestock died from starvation and exhaustion. The United Nations blames climate change for this severe winter in Mongolia. We begin with the Maldives and their president Mohammad Muizzu, who's trying to make a career out of villainizing India. Muizzu faces a new charge now. He's been accused of lying. Now, this man has been in power for over 3 months. Enough time for a leader to settle in, to set big goals, and to get down to business. But President Muizzu's stint so far has been turbulent. In the past 100 days, he has focused on just one thing: India out. He has targeted Indian troops in the Maldives and made repeated calls for their withdrawal. Now, an opposition leader says Muizzu has been lying. The leader in question is Abdullah Shahid, the former foreign minister of the Maldives. Shahid has given a statement. He says there are no armed foreign soldiers in the country and that Muizzu has been spreading falsehoods. I have the full statement with me, and let me quote from what he said. 100 days and it's clear President Muizzu's claims of thousands of Indian military personnel were just another in a string of lies. The current administration's inability to provide specific numbers speaks volumes. There are no armed foreign soldiers stationed in the country. President Muizzu is yet to respond to this, but the facts of this case are easy to establish. Thousands of Indian troops in the Maldives is a gross exaggeration. Male is yet to share the specific numbers, as this former minister also said, but by most accounts, there are around 70 Indian security personnel in the Maldives, 70, not thousands. And Muizzu has been pushing for their return. That's the first task he took up after taking oath, and he's been talking to and talking at New Delhi about this ever since. India, of course, is obliged, respecting the sovereign decision of a neighbor, however ill-advised. So by the month of May, civilians will replace these soldiers. But the open confrontation with India is hurting President Muizzu. He faces an election next month. This one is going to be a parliamentary election in the month of March, scheduled for the 17th of March, in fact. And Muizzu is desperate to win this election. You see, while he may be the president of the Maldives, he doesn't control the parliament. His party and the ruling alliance do not have a majority in parliament. And without a majority, Muizzu's government is handicapped, also potentially vulnerable. Only last month, the opposition tried to impeach the president. After lawmakers clashed in the parliament, this was over cabinet appointments. The opposition held Muizzu responsible for those clashes. They tried to initiate impeachment proceedings. The government then moved to the Supreme Court, and that's where the matter is now, pending in court. Without a verdict, the opposition cannot file the motion, the impeachment motion. Plus, there's another technicality that Muizzu is hiding behind. The Maldivian parliament has 87 seats. In order for the impeachment to go through, the opposition needs 58 votes. But right now, 7 seats are vacant. So basically, according to the new number, they only need 54 votes to impeach the president. The opposition has 56, 2 more than the required number. So they say they can impeach President Muizzu. But the president's supporters argue that there can be no impeachment without a full house. So those 7 vacant seats are a technicality, and the bid remains stalled, although it can very easily be revived after the court's decision and the election. So for the Muizzu camp, an election victory is the only option they have if they are to survive. They need a majority in parliament to stop the impeachment. And that victory, that majority, is not assured. While the India Out campaign propelled Muizzu to power, the momentum is fizzling out. Here's what the opposition says.
The president is realizing, that he's never, been elected to a major position as such. During Yamin's time, he was the housing minister. He was the Male mayor. But then he could, whatever he didn't do, he blamed it on the government. Whatever he did, he did. And I thought maybe he thought he was the president of the world. He could do whatever you want.
That was Maria Didi, former defense minister of the Maldives. She was in New Delhi over the weekend to participate in the Firstpost Defense Summit. She believes that the Muizzu government is now softening its position vis-a-vis India. Recently, there was a military exercise in the Indian Ocean. The drill was called Dosti, meaning friendship. And the Maldives joined this drill with Sri Lanka and India. So it's not a complete breakdown. Muizzu is posturing for his domestic audience. He's angling for Chinese money, and then also participating in a military drill with India. It's mixed messaging. It's also a very risky game. The people of the Maldives are watching. They will vote again next month and deliver a verdict on President Muizzu and his India Out campaign. What's the best way to know more about someone? Just look through their bills. Spending patterns tell us a lot about people, what they prioritize, what they ignore, and what they value. So tonight we're looking at India's bills. Where did Indian households spend their money? The answer lies in the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. It is prepared by the Ministry of Statistics. The latest one covers 2022 and 2023, and it has 5 major takeaways. Number 1, rural India is now consuming a lot more. In 2011, the average monthly rural consumption was around 1,400 rupees. Now it is more than 3,700 rupees, from 1,400 to 3,700. That's a 164% rise. In fact, rural India outperformed urban India. Here in cities, consumption increased by 146%. So that's good news overall. Takeaway number 2, Indians are spending less on food. Again, let's look at the numbers. In 2011, food made up almost 53% of rural spending. If you go back to 1999, it was almost 60% of the spending. But the latest figure is 46%. So less than half of rural spending is on food. Same in urban India. Cities used to spend 48% of their income on food. Now they spend just 39% on it. I guess the question is why? Because that's how the human mind and economics work. Indians now earn more than before, and when income rises, you spend a lesser share of it on food. You diversify your purchases. You start buying other things, maybe a bit of luxury, maybe some gadgets, maybe some experiences like travel. Now, this trend was deduced back in the 19th century. But as data shows, it is still relevant. And just to be clear, this does not mean that Indians are eating less. It means they're earning more. And from their overall income, a smaller share is being spent on food. Which brings us to takeaway number 3. What is India eating? Again, we see a major shift. For a long time, the Indian diet was based on cereals and pulses, basically food grains. Just look at the data from 2011. Almost 26% of rural food spending was on food grains. What does that mean? Assume that your food expenditure per month is 100 rupees. You spend 100 rupees every month on food. Then out of this, 26 rupees was used to buy food grains, cereals and pulses, more than a quarter. But now that share is down to 15%. Again, the question is why? Because rural Indians are now buying other things. The share of milk is 18%, fruits is 8%, animal protein is 11%, and processed food is 20%. Same in urban India. 4 categories make up 65% of food spending in Indian cities: milk, animal protein, fruits, and processed food. Now, this shows a clear change in consumer behavior. The average Indian is buying new things. They're buying more fruit, more animal protein, and a lot of processed items. It's a sign of increasing income. It's also a good sign for nutritional standards because fruits and vegetables have important nutrients. Meat and eggs have protein. So the end result is a balanced diet, but I must say here the processed food bit is slightly worrying. You do not want to be spending too much on sugary drinks and colas. Now, takeaway number 4, more discretionary spending. We briefly touched upon this. Indians are spending more on durable goods, things like televisions and refrigerators. This is true in rural and urban India. Rural India's spending on durables was just 2.6% in 1999. It has now risen to 6.9%. In urban India, it has risen from 3.6% to 7%. Again, this has knock-on effects, this kind of change in spending patterns. A fridge preserves your food for longer periods. A washing machine cuts down your chores. A computer speeds up your work. So these durables are making our lives easier. They're making us more productive. I know all of this sounds great, but takeaway number 5 is a downer. Yes, things are improving, but inequality persists. The poorest 5% in rural India spend just 46 rupees per day, the bottom 5%. In urban India, the poorest 5% are spending 67 rupees per day. Compare this to the top 5%. They spend 350 rupees per day in rural areas and 700 rupees per day in urban areas. Now look at this gap. Bridging this gap will be a big challenge, which is why this survey is so important, because any economic policy needs data. Data gives you direction, data gives you ideas, and data eventually also delivers results if used properly. That's where such surveys come in. This one is released every 5 years. But the one in 2017-18 was not released. It followed the introduction of GST and demonetization. So the government said the data quality was an issue. So the last survey we have on this is from 2011-12, more than a decade ago. Safe to say, India has changed a lot since then. The next government will have to formulate policies based on this data. It shows that the Indian consumer is eager. Her spending patterns have changed. The key is to build on that, and more importantly, to reduce the inequalities. To the US now, where the presidential election is increasingly looking like a 2020 rematch. Donald Trump is consolidating his lead and marching towards his 3rd nomination.
That is really something. This was a little sooner than we anticipated. It was an even bigger win than we anticipated. And I was just informed that we got double the number of votes that has ever been received in the great state of South Carolina.
Trump won the Republican primary in South Carolina, meaning Republican voters in this state want Donald Trump to be their presidential nominee. Why is this important? Because this is the home state of Nikki Haley. So this story is not so much about Donald Trump's win as about Nikki Haley's loss. She has lost her home state, and she's the only one challenging Trump in the Republican camp, the only other contender in this race. Or is she? Did she ever have a real chance? I ask because the margins tell a story. Trump won by a lead of 20 points. And this is his fourth consecutive victory. He got almost 60% of the vote in South Carolina. Nikki Haley got about 40%. And it's this vote bank that she's still counting on. She hopes to build on it and to make a comeback.
I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word.
Now, it's good to be optimistic, but Nikki Haley has a mountain to climb. She has suffered 4 straight defeats, including 1 to none of the above. None of the above. That option got more votes than Nikki Haley in Nevada, and that says something. 4 defeats also means that she's also losing key sponsors, like the Koch brothers. They're major Republican donors. In November last year, they extended support to Nikki Haley. They said Republicans are ready to move on from Donald Trump. Since then, they've spent millions of dollars on Haley's campaign, but now they're cutting their losses. They've issued a statement. They say they support Haley's plan to keep campaigning, but they feel it won't make much of a difference. It won't, quote unquote, widen her path to victory, as they put it. That's what the statement said. So Nikki Haley's campaign is losing monetary support. It's also losing political backing. Influential Republicans are rallying around Donald Trump. He's most likely to secure the Republican nomination. He's ditched all debates. He came on top in all primaries so far, and he's leading all opinion polls. Donald Trump is the clear Republican frontrunner and looks ahead of Biden too in opinion polls. But none of this guarantees an election win, because Trump's biggest challenges are legal. He faces 4 criminal trials next month and a slew of other civil trials. A legal upset is the only roadblock on his path right now. For now, he's turned it into a campaign pitch. Listen to this.
I'm being indicted for you, and never forget, our enemies want to take away my freedom, because I will never let them take away your freedom, and I'm never going to let it happen.
Trump's problem is not just the cases, it's also the money that he needs to fight them. All these legal battles are burning a hole in his pocket. He's already on the hook for $500 million. In one suit alone, the damages are worth $450 million. A New York judge punished Trump for inflating his worth and deceiving lenders. Then there is another bill of $83 million. This is from a defamation trial. In 2023 alone, Trump spent some $50 million on legal bills. In the last 2 years, he paid $76 million to attorneys. Trump is using campaign money to settle these bills. And his legal troubles are only growing. The sums are large enough to drain his political coffers. Trump's biggest challenge is to sustain this fight while running for the presidency. How will he pay for the ads and the rallies? If the campaign funds are used to settle legal bills, he'll need some fresh financing. Where will that money come from? Will the Republican Party step up? Trump is trying to make that happen. He wants to install Lara Trump at the RNC. That's the Republican National Committee, RNC. Lara Trump is the former president's daughter-in-law. The RNC is the governing body of the Republican Party. It looks after the day-to-day operations of the party. Now, Trump wants his daughter-in-law in this committee, and this has led to speculation that he may ask Republicans to cover his legal bills. Some party members are worried. They're pushing for resolutions. If passed, such resolutions would stop the party, the Republican Party, from paying the legal fees of Donald Trump. The resolutions may or may not be passed, but the challenge for Trump is clear. He may be the Republican choice. He may even spearhead their campaign, but he'll have to find a way to survive till November. Now let's talk about the Ukraine war. It's been 732 days. The war has entered its 3rd year now. Thousands of people have died. Millions have been displaced. The West keeps giving aid. Russia keeps getting hit by sanctions. Yet 2 years later, not much has changed. The front line has barely moved. Ukraine has not made gains. Russia is powering on with its offensive, and the world is asking one question: when will this war end? 2024 could be the year. And here's why we say this. Ukraine has floated the idea of a peace summit. No official statement yet, but a proposal to host a summit in Switzerland, a neutral venue. When do they plan to do it? By this summer. And what's on the agenda? Zelensky's peace plan. It's a 10-point plan. It includes the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, the withdrawal of all Russian troops, the protection of food and energy supplies, nuclear safety, and the release of all prisoners of war. Basically, the Ukrainian president wants to make a peace offer to Russia.
As soon as the participating countries prepare relevant and fair documents. This doesn't mean Russia will accept the document. No one can guarantee who will represent the country then. But anyhow, this document, just like the Grain Initiative, will be presented by the participants in one form or another. This has not been defined yet. It will be presented to the Russian side.
It does not stop there. Reports say Ukraine will be ready for a second summit, one where they can sit down with Moscow and hopefully discuss the end of the war. The million-dollar question here is, will Russia oblige? We haven't heard from them yet, but Ukraine says it will be prepared for a second summit.
And we will be ready for the second summit, for taking relevant diplomatic steps to achieve just peace and to end the war. This is our initiative. We want as many countries as possible to join it. We need to move forward.
So technicalities aside, Ukraine is basically reaching out. It wants to engage with Russia. It wants to end the war, which seems like a positive move. But this won't be the first time the two sides will be talking peace. Zelensky has talked about it before. In 2022, he announced his peace formula. Moscow did not take the bait then. It called the plan, quote-unquote, absurd. Will this time be different? Also, why is Ukraine reaching out now? Because they're running out of options. 2023 was supposed to be their year. They planned a counter-offensive. They went to town with it, and they failed. Since then, things have only gone downhill for them. Western aid has dwindled. America's $60 billion aid package is on hold, and Russia is taking more territory. Last year, they took the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. This month, in fact, they've taken the city of Avdiivka. For Ukraine, the losses are mounting. Zelensky says some 31,000 troops have been killed in this conflict, 31,000. There isn't enough ammunition, and fatigue is setting in. So proposing peace makes sense for him. Ukraine's war strategy was Western support, but 2 years into the war, that support is not guaranteed. Western leaders may visit Kyiv, they may pledge solidarity, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is. The aid is running out. The F-16 jets are yet to arrive. So Ukraine has just three options as of today. One, it can let the war go on and suffer more losses. Two, it can accept defeat. And three, it can propose peace and make the most of a bad situation. It has chosen to propose peace. I come back to the question, will Russia play ball? They have the upper hand right now. Their offensive has picked up. Russian forces are taking over more Ukrainian cities. They have enough ammunition, they have more troops, and they have the momentum. Why would they accept a peace proposal?
As far as we understand, we are talking about the strange format of the Geneva conference to discuss the peace plan of the Ukrainian President Zelensky. We have repeatedly said that this is a strange format, to say the least, because some peace plans are being discussed without the participation of Russia, which in itself is frivolous and even laughable.
Moscow is calling Ukraine's plan laughable. Will they accept the proposal then? We'll be tracking the developments for you. To Pakistan now, where a woman was mobbed on the streets of Lahore. Why? Because she was wearing a kurta, a shirt, with an Arabic print on it. Her clothes had random words in Arabic. The crowd mistook it for verses of the Quran. So they surrounded her, raised slogans, and asked her to remove the dress. At the end, she had to be rescued by the police. The woman is safe now. She has apologized for no fault of hers. But imagine what would have happened had the police not arrived on time. Our next report tells you about Pakistan's mob fury.
It was a normal day in Lahore. This woman had stepped out to shop with her husband. She was in a restaurant when suddenly a crowd surrounded her. Why? Because of her clothes. The woman was wearing a normal kurta, but it had Arabic words on it. Nothing special. The dress had the Arabic word for beautiful, but the crowd didn't understand that. They thought it was verses of the Quran. They thought she was disrespecting the Quran. For them, it was blasphemy. Around 300 people gathered. The mob surrounded her. They raised slogans. They wanted her to take her dress off. Some even threatened to behead her. Amid all this, the woman stood alone. She was covering her face. She was scared. She didn't know what the mob could do next. That's when the police came in. They were called to the restaurant. They tried to pacify the crowd, but it was all in vain. That's when a female police officer jumped into action. Officer Naqvi tried to negotiate with the crowd. She had some success there. She went inside the restaurant and started helping the scared woman. The woman then changed into a burqa. She covered her face and finally got out of the restaurant. The police formed a chain around her. She was then escorted to the police station. Muslim scholars were called to the station. They confirmed that it was just Arabic calligraphy, not the verses of the Quran. But still, the woman apologized. She was not at fault, yet she still said she didn't want to hurt anyone. She was in Lahore to do some shopping and has since left the city. The Chief of Punjab Police is now calling for Naqvi to receive an award for her bravery. Blasphemy is punishable by death in Pakistan. Blasphemy convictions are common in the country. At least 50 people are in custody over blasphemy charges, but many are lynched to death, even before any judicial trial. They are usually killed by mobs, even if the allegations aren't proven. Since 1990, at least 85 people have been killed just over blasphemy allegations. Some parties have even called for blasphemers to be beheaded. In August 2023, a mob burned Christian churches and houses in Faisalabad. They accused the community of desecrating the Quran. The blasphemy law is often used against Pakistan's minorities. This incident could have escalated if the police did not reach on time. And all of this happened just a day before Punjab got its first female chief minister. Maryam Nayaz will now rule the state. But can she keep the mob under control?
What does it take to join NATO? For Ukraine, 30,000 martyrs and counting, but for Sweden, just a big check. So much for shared values and democracy. Sweden was always a neutral country, not aligned to the West or Russia. It's a policy that has kept them at peace. Sweden's last war was in 1814. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, that changed. Two non-aligned countries applied to join NATO, Finland and Sweden. Finland joined last year, but Sweden's entry was held up by two members, first Turkey, then Hungary. But not anymore. Hungary's government has agreed to let Sweden join. Their parliament will vote later today. But it's a mere formality. By tomorrow, NATO will have 32 members. How consequential will that be? Well, Sweden is a handy military power. They're ranked 29th in the Global Firepower Index. They have cutting-edge submarines. They also have the homegrown Gripen fighter jets. So Sweden can fortify NATO's Baltic flanks. That's the military angle. And politically, it's a setback to Vladimir Putin. His war was supposed to deter NATO's expansion. Instead, two new members have joined the group. I guess that's a strategic win for the West. But we have two questions to ask. Number one, what is the cost of this NATO expansion? Not the financial cost, the political cost. And number two, why does NATO need more members? Let's look at the cost first. Turkey was the first roadblock to NATO expansion. They said Finland could not join. Why? Because they shielded Kurdish dissidents. Now, the Kurds are an ethnic group in Turkey. They are political rivals of President Erdogan, so he played hardball. He got Finland to lift the arms embargo on Turkey. He also got them to loosen extradition rules. In exchange, he approved Finland's application. Then came Sweden. This time, Erdogan upped his demands. He wanted the US to give him fighter jets, specifically the F-16s. Again, Washington caved. Once Erdogan approved Sweden's bid, the White House agreed to sell F-16s to Turkey. Which brings us to Hungary. What is Prime Minister Viktor Orban getting? a massive defense deal.
Többször is beszéltem.
I have talked to the Swedish PM several times, and today we will close this process. We will finalize all pending issues and we will sign a defense industry deal, a serious one considering Hungary's size. And we will also lay down some decisions or goals about military cooperation.
Lefektetünk majd néhány döntést vagy irányt.
4 Gripen jets are on the table. Reports say Hungary will buy them from Sweden. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a barter or maybe even a bribe. Sweden sells fighter jets to Hungary. In return, they get NATO approval. Doesn't sound very responsible or fair, does it? Well, that's NATO for you. They keep talking about shared values and democracy, but in practice, it's all about poking Russia. Just look at all the compromises that they've made. Tweaked their national laws, put Kurdish dissidents at risk of extradition, and then sold weapons. This is not how an alliance organically expands. This is a strategic poke. So to answer the first question, the cost of NATO's expansion is its own self-proclaimed values. Now to the second question. Why does NATO need more members? Same answer, to poke Russia. Before 2021, NATO was almost asleep. French President Macron called it brain dead. But the Ukraine war jolted it back to life. Suddenly, NATO was back in action. Having said that, this is not the NATO of the 20th century. This is a divided and weak NATO. Just look at what's happening in the US. Donald Trump doesn't care about this alliance. He said he would encourage Putin to attack NATO members. Same with Turkey and Hungary. They don't care about NATO's strategic objectives. They're looking for the next deal, maybe a fighter jet or killer drones. So NATO's relevance has to be questioned again. What ties this alliance together? Will they actually defend each other if attacked? And most importantly, who's the villain here? There was talk of NATO pivoting to Asia. The likes of Australia and Japan were invited to the annual NATO summit. But things haven't taken off. Why? Because there is no political will. NATO was never an alliance for something. It was always against something. But today's NATO members cannot agree on that. For example, Hungary's Orbán does not see Putin as a threat. He sees him as a reliable energy supplier. I could say the same about Turkey's Erdogan. So the NATO has been reduced to a flashy centerpiece. You wanted it, so you bought it. But you're not quite sure where to put it. Our next story is from Brazil, from the streets of Sao Paulo. Yesterday, they were awash in yellow and green. Thousands marched while wearing Brazil's national colors. It wasn't because of a football match. There wasn't even a carnival. It was a show of political support for this man, Jair Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, also sometimes called the Trump of the tropics. Bolsonaro sent out a call for support. He claims that he's being politically persecuted, being falsely accused of plotting a coup. Thousands of his supporters believe him, and they showed up to support their leader. Here's our report.
185,000. That's the number of people who took to the streets of Sao Paulo yesterday. Decked in yellow and green, they took over the city's Paulista Avenue. They came out for this man, Jair Bolsonaro, former president of Brazil, often called the Trump of the tropics. Bolsonaro's followers came out to show solidarity, to support the man they believe was robbed of the presidency, and who, according to them, is now the subject of a political vendetta. If all this sounds familiar, it doesn't end there. Bolsonaro has been accused of trying to overturn the last Brazilian election. Back in 2022, he was accused of inciting his followers, who stormed Brazil's Congress building on the 8th of January 2023. Around the same time, just 2 years earlier, Trump supporters had stormed the US Capitol building. As you can see, Bolsonaro's situation is very similar to that of his northern namesake, except in one key aspect. Bolsonaro is also accused of trying to orchestrate a coup. Earlier this month, Bolsonaro's passport was confiscated. He was later interrogated, accused of hatching a plot. The Brazilian police say Bolsonaro was trying to get the support of the country's armed forces. He was allegedly preparing a presidential decree, one that would have allowed him to keep power after he lost the election. And he apparently wanted the military to support his takeover. But the Brazilian police say that this plan was eventually dropped because Bolsonaro did not get the military's help. It's a scandalous accusation. We don't have much concrete proof yet. Bolsonaro, of course, denies any and all wrongdoing.
What is a coup? It's to put tanks on the streets. It's guns. It's conspiracy. It's bringing the political class to your side. This is what a coup is. None of it was done in Brazil. And besides, why do they keep accusing me of trying a coup? Now the coup is because of a document with a decree from the Defense Department. A coup based on the Constitution. Please, have mercy.
He is correct in saying that no tanks were put on the street. When he lost the 2022 election, the guns remained in their holsters. We also don't have the details behind his aborted decree. That case is still ongoing. So for now, the coup allegations seem limited to what his supporters did, to Brazil's insurrection moment. But more evidence could come up against Bolsonaro. He could even be sent to prison for his actions. And that is partly why he called Sunday's mega rally. It shows his opponents that he still has massive support on the ground. It shows them that he is still a force to be reckoned with. Basically, it was a show of force. Will it be enough to get them to back off? We'll find out in the weeks to come.
Now let's turn our attention to Northern Africa, to Algeria. Algeria is the largest country in Africa by size. It's also the largest country in the entire Arab world, so it makes sense that the country would want similarly massive infrastructure. Yesterday, it took a step in that direction. Algeria officially inaugurated the Great Mosque of Algiers.
The Algiers Mosque is the third largest mosque in the world in terms of size and architecture, and the largest in Africa where we are. It will be, God willing, the starting point for this new invitation to Islam.
It's the largest mosque outside of Mecca and Medina, the largest in all of Africa. It also has the tallest minaret in the world, reaching a height of 265 meters or 869 feet. The structure sprawls over almost 28 hectares of land. Its prayer hall alone can accommodate 120,000 people. The mosque is grand in every sense of the word. It also proposes to champion a grand mission.
Today is the reward of the immense efforts of our martyrs represented by this place, and also a teaching to guide us towards the good in moderation, knowing that Algeria is known for its scholars, such as Abdelhamid Ben Badis and the Muslim ulemas who have all worked to spread Islam and an Islam of moderation.
He says the mosque will help spread the Islam of moderation. Algeria has a troubled history with extremism. There was a civil war in the 1990s. One faction was led by Islamists. The government crushed their movement, and the mosque is meant to draw people away from hardline beliefs, which is a good cause. But is this mosque really the right symbol for moderation? Because the project is mired in controversy. Firstly, the mosque was commissioned by Algeria's former president, Abdel Aziz Bouteflika. The man served as Algeria's president for 20 years until he was forced to resign in 2019. He'd wanted to name the mosque after himself to leave behind a legacy, not exactly something that screams moderation, but just when he was about to inaugurate the building, the people of Algeria ousted this president. So they averted one disaster. But that doesn't take away from the troubled history. There have been numerous corruption allegations, reports about contractors receiving kickbacks, state officials taking a cut, about the mosque even being built on seismically risky ground, meaning an earthquake could bring it down someday. The Algerian government has denied these allegations, of course, and it has gone ahead with the inauguration, which is also a bit of a sham, considering that the mosque has been open to tourists for about 5 years already. So lots of issues here, but none compares to the biggest controversy, the hypocrisy of the Algerian government. Algeria chose a Chinese company to build this great mosque. The contract was awarded to China State Construction Engineering, a company owned by the Chinese state. You know, the same Chinese state that is destroying mosques back home, the same Chinese state that is confining and re-educating, as they put it, Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. China has been closing or converting thousands of mosques, limiting the construction of new ones and gradually clamping down on the freedom of worship. But while it guts mosques at home, Beijing apparently profits from their construction abroad. It likely made a tidy profit by helping build Algeria's Grand Mosque, which officially cost about $900 million. But considering the cost overruns and rampant corruption allegations, the actual cost is estimated to be around $2 billion. So China probably made off with quite the haul. Now, no one really expects China to care about their hypocrisy, but what about Algeria? How are Muslim nations so quick to turn a blind eye to Beijing's abuses? Does Chinese money really wash away all their crimes? Apparently it does for Algeria. The country has signed oil deals and initiated railway projects with China. It was also contemplating military procurement deals. It seems the benefits of Chinese trade outweigh any moral dilemmas. But is that really the type of moderation that Algeria wants to practice? It seems the Great Mosque of Algiers has been built on shaky foundations, both literally and metaphorically. Our next story comes from Bangladesh. It was once a home for Asian elephants, but today the animals are critically endangered. There are only about 200 elephants left in Bangladesh. Half of them live in captivity. So Dhaka has finally addressed the elephant in the room. It has passed a landmark ruling banning the adoption of wild elephants and protecting them from exploitation. But why did the elephant numbers decline in Bangladesh in the first place? Why is the government acting now? And can the court order help boost the elephant population of the country? Our next report tells you.
It all began last year. In the month of May, 2 elephants were walking in Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh. They were being guided by mahouts and being used for begging on the streets. The scene was nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until the mahouts began guiding the elephants along train tracks at a railway station. But shortly after, a train hit one of the elephants, leaving the animal dead on the spot. The mahouts fled the scene immediately and took the other elephant with them. This incident shocked Bangladesh. There were protests, animal activists spoke up, so did college students. People came together and united in demanding justice for the dead elephant. This tragic incident also shed light on a crisis looming in Bangladesh. The South Asian country was once home to one of the biggest populations of Asian elephants, but habitat loss and poaching have caused a marked decrease in numbers. Over time, the elephants became critically endangered. By 2017, about 270 elephants remained. And now, there are only 200 Asian elephants in Bangladesh. About half of them live in captivity. Almost all of them are used for begging and performances in circuses or street shows. This is a common practice in Bangladesh, all thanks to a policy. The Dhaka government allowed young elephants to be taken into captivity as long as the forestry department issued licenses to logging groups. They would use the elephants to haul logs, but this route is rarely followed. Despite logging licenses, the terms of the contract are broken, and most elephants end up with circus groups. Young calves are separated from their mothers. They are shackled for months, transported in poor conditions, and tortured repeatedly. But finally, it seems Dhaka is ready to address the elephant in the room. It plans to solve the problem. The High Court has issued an order. It has suspended all logging licenses of Asian elephants. The order bans their adoption and protects them from exploitation. So the elephants can no longer be captured and taken into captivity. Animal activists are calling the order a landmark ruling. Only time will tell if the order actually helps boost the elephant population in the country. But experts say that this is a crucial first step.
The Webster Dictionary defines happiness as a state of well-being and contentment. For most people, being happy is a personal goal, but for governments, it is an operational objective. So how can nations achieve happiness? by ranking highly on a number of parameters: stability, freedom, public safety, social progress. But not all countries make the cut. Being a truly happy nation, much like being a happy human, is not that common. Report after report will tell you this. The most prominent among them is the World Happiness Report. Its first happiness index was published about a decade ago, and 6 out of these 10 years, one country has remained on top: Finland. It's a small northerly nation with a population of just 5.6 million people, and it has become the poster child for happiness. Finland is branded as the world's happiest country. But did you know that it wasn't always the case? Only a few decades ago, Finland had one of the highest suicide rates in the world. 1990 was a particularly dark year. That's when suicide mortality rate reached a peak. That year, Finland recorded 1,512 deaths by suicide, more than 1,500 deaths by suicide. Its population then was just under 5 million. So over 1,000 deaths is a big number. Experts say alcohol abuse was the biggest factor. Apart from that, the depression rate was soaring. But Finland has come a long way since. By contrast, in 2022, Finland had 740 suicides. So over the past 3 decades, Finland has halved the number of suicides. How did they do it? The secret to their happiness is multifold. Finnish national culture supports time spent with friends, but also time spent alone. Additionally, Finland has beautiful forests and lakes. It is Europe's most forested country. Finland also has low unemployment levels, low rates of inequality, and high rates of trust and security. But the biggest reason was this: a policy push. Finland puts mental health at the front and center of its governance. Mental health services are a nationwide priority in the country. Municipal authorities are in charge of it. They are heavily subsidized by taxes. Huge budgets are allocated. This year, in fact, $391 million have been put aside for this, which means fewer citizens struggle to get help. And that's not all. Since the 1990s, Finland has run suicide prevention projects. They have improved care for depressive disorders and allowed early detection. There are awareness programs as well, not just for the public, but also healthcare providers and journalists. There is a robust national suicide crisis helpline. These projects have evolved with time. And now there are digital resources as well. All health districts have online mental health services like self-help tools or video therapy sessions. And all of this has helped them. Finland's suicide rate now stands at 12.9, meaning about 13 deaths per 100,000 people, slightly above the European average and above countries like Russia, India, and Australia. But it's still significant progress for a country that had one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Finland's success proves that the right policy can make all the difference. It's a lesson for other countries to take. Globally, every year, 700,000 people die by suicide, 7 lakh people. 5% adults suffer from depression, and this is the recorded bit. And while every nation has its own challenges and the Finnish template cannot be replicated everywhere, their example has one takeaway for everyone, and that is the power of communication. In Finland, the word suicide used to be unspeakable. Now it is part of everyday conversation because the government is talking about mental health and transforming attitudes. So if any nation wants to boost happiness, I guess starting a conversation is the way to go. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Brussels, protesting farmers throw bottles at the police. In New York, the annual Lunar New Year parade lights up the city with traditional lion and dragon dances. And in China, takeout lovers were in for a surprise after their food orders were delivered by drones. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. The bomb exploded in the parking garage, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. Islamic militants were behind this blast. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.